Welcome everybody to the first ever episode. What are you looking at? You looking at the lens or you looking at the viewfinder?
I'm looking at the
Okay.
the
Just because I was looking at the viewfinder. We're Jalen and Cacie. Welcome to the Jalen and Cacie show. Shout out to Destiny Music for that beat that brought us in. I've been talking a long time about doing a podcast. And for those of you new to the channel, what you don't know is that this YouTube channel started with a podcast.
Yeah.
And we stopped for a while, moved to doing Jalen and Cacie stories. Then you did a podcast for a little while. The time is now, or now's the time.
Like 3 episodes.
3 episodes like that. So we've gone on and off doing podcasts.
Yeah.
I've in the past felt guilty about starting and stopping different things. I feel like we people are used to one thing and then we switch to something else. But then I got over it because, hey, we're figuring it out as we go.
Yeah, I mean, our lives have been in a flux, I would say, the past year. As a lot of people...
Our lives have been in flux since we got married,
Well,
honestly.
that is true. That's the Jalen and Cacie story.
Yes.
Came out of that. Mm-hmm. But like a lot of people's lives over the past year and a half, your lives been kind of up in flux and you're kind of relearning things and revamping. And for us, we're learning how to not stay stuck.
Yeah.
In doing one thing one way because we feel like, well, God told me to do it. And he did. But you got to also listen when he's telling you it's time to shift, It's time to move or to add or delete, and that's where we are right now.
I think both of us have struggled with that a lot.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Because for me, anyway, it's easy to get comfortable, especially when things seem to be flowing and you don't want to stop, And so when the Lord is like, okay, it's time for you to shift and do this, or when life events happen, like having a baby, buying a new home, starting a new job, or
which we kind of did all three of those.
Yeah, starting a whole new career.
Honestly, both of us really.
Yeah, we did.
Actually, that's
and we'll talk about that. When family dynamics change, like the loss of a loved one, just a whole lot of things. And we'll talk about those things as we go along with the podcast and with the show.
Yeah. So anyway, Jalen and Cacie show, episode 1. Share it with somebody. I don't know what platforms we're on. Probably, I'm not even gonna say them. Just share it with whatever you're listening on. With somebody. It's gonna be great. And we'll do some answering of questions. We're gonna shift the answering of questions that we've done on video, and we're gonna put it on here on this podcast. So if you send in questions, we'll answer them somewhere in this podcast. But anyway, let's get into the topic. We were talking about this on the way home, and I said we were already planning on recording today. It had been a while since we recorded any new content for our family friends, but we knew we wanted to record something today. And after our conversation on the way home from church this morning, I was like, let's just set up and do this. So we set up. It was difficult because we're out of practice, but we did.
So listen, this first one, y'all, it might be a little rough, but we're going to get through it.
Yeah, we're going to get through it. It's going to get better as we go. We're going to get new equipment too because we do need some, but praise God. So we were talking about being stuck. And I guess the easiest thing to start with would be your job because it's probably relatable to everybody. Because everyone, a lot of people have gone through the same thing due to this pandemic. And I had a conversation with you that every time you watch commercials, they're like, our lives have changed. We're all getting through it together. But what I always hated about those commercials was that it always made it sound like no one knows what caused it. Like, the coronavirus came and just changed things for everybody. No, coronavirus came and then the government's changed everything for everybody by shutting down people's businesses. You were one of those businesses that were impacted by that.
Oh yeah, I was because if you don't know, I am a licensed cosmetologist, have been for the past 18 years. And, a lot of things were happening simultaneously because the end of 2019, we discovered that we was pregnant with our son, JJ, which he will be 1 in 30 days.
Exactly 30 days, he'll be 1 year old.
Oh my gosh, we almost have a 1-year-old, like a whole toddler is about to release in our home. But anyway, so found out we was pregnant in 2019. And of course, from there, I was making plans as far as how long I'm going to work and take maternity leave. And I had a whole plan to, once I got so far along, I'm going to take maternity leave and then I'm going to come back and do business as usual. Well, I guess, was it February or something? March, things began to change. The coronavirus is now being announced and now there's a mandatory shutdown for all unessential businesses. And my business was considered unessential, which I was very offended by. We'll talk about that another time. But nonetheless, we had to shut down. And so I'm at home. And I'm pregnant, so I'm thinking, okay, well, it's not all that bad. We'll go back and I need to rest and blah, blah. But by the time things opened up for me, I am further along in pregnancy and I'm tired. And of course, clients don't want to come back out. because of they're scared of the coronavirus and so forth. And you gotta go through all these procedures now to even open your doors to clients. And it was a whole lot of stuff. So I decided to take maternity leave sooner than I had planned. And still in my mind, I'm thinking I'm going to come back. But to rewind a little bit, even before I got pregnant, even before the coronavirus was a thing, the Lord was trying to tell me, or he was telling me, it was time to come from the chair. But me and my stubbornness, I didn't want to let go. I was afraid to let go.
I came to you and said that.
You came to me and said the Lord had spoke to you, and I was like, well, I ain't feeling it. Mm-hmm. I ain't feeling it in my spirit.
I knew she wouldn't, and I knew I wasn't supposed to press the issue. I was supposed to come and tell you what the Lord said to me, and I knew you were going to say, no, I'm not ready yet.
But what's funny is that 4 years prior to that, I was ready to leave from behind the chair. I was fed up. I was tired. And the reasons I was leaving then, I was just done. I had lost my passion for it. I was just done. I was exhausted and I was ready. We was about to get married and everything. And I was like, I'm done and I'm ready to quit. And then we got counseling and I was like, okay, I can do this. But, and for then after that, for some reason, I'm just like, well, I'm going to stay here. And I just got stuck. But you told me the Lord said that. And then another family member came and said, I had this dream the Lord gave me about you and your business. I'm like, stop having dreams about my business or stop hearing about my business. I'm not leaving behind this chair. And then smack, here comes the coronavirus. Smack, I'm pregnant.
You had a client that said that once you had your son.
I did. I had a client to tell me, she was like, girl, when you had this baby, you're not coming back. And I was like, I am coming back. Don't tell me what I'm not going to do. I'm coming back. And literally, once I had my son in my arms, and I think after that first 6 weeks had passed of recovery, I was like, I ain't coming back. Yep. I'm not coming back. But even with that, knowing that I wasn't coming back, at least not in the capacity that I was before, I still had a hard time accepting the fact that I was no longer doing this thing that I've been doing for the past 18 years of my life. My identity was wrapped up in that. I had plans that I hadn't executed yet for the business. I had my vision for it. I had long lost God's vision for this business. And I'm going to be honest with you guys. The Lord told me to do what I was doing. And I believe that 100%. I never doubt that. But along the way, I lost sight of his direction. And I started doing things my way. Mm-hmm. I started letting outside influences telling me, you should do it this way. You should be here. You should do that. And I was copying and mimicking the way the world was doing things. And it was not working out for me. And for a little while, I had success. I was doing well according to man's standard. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't what God told me to do. At least not that way. It wasn't God's standard of doing good. And long story short, I lost steam. And that's because the grace wasn't there for me to do that. And so here I am, kind of being forced to come from behind the chair. And I almost felt like it was taken from me. And I was mad about that because it wasn't on my own terms. Yeah. And if I know anything about me, I am a control freak person. I like to be in control. And I had no control over what was happening around me. And it freaked me out. And I found myself a little depressed, a little bit sad. And then sandwiched on top of that, family stuff, new baby. Anybody had a new baby, you're tired. You're trying to get used to being a new mom. And then my father was sick, and he was dealing with his illness, and he passed away 4 months after having my son, our son. I don't know. I think my mind just froze. That's really how I felt. My mind just froze, and I didn't know who I was anymore. I didn't. Beyond the fact of knowing that I'm a child of God, but what does that even look like now? What does that even mean? Who am I? And when people ask me, well, what do you do? Right now, I'm at home feeding this child, and I hadn't even accepted the whole stay-at-home mom thing. I can remember I was very adamant. I'm not going to be your typical stay-at-home mom. I was not going to wear that title. Like, I didn't mind having kids, but I was not going to be the stay-at-home mom, the wife. That just was not going to be my identity card. And I had to accept a whole new life really fast. And so, yeah, I don't even want to add anything.
Well, just observing you from the outside, I knew that you're supposed to come from behind that chair.
Yeah.
I knew you were supposed to take some time away from the business as you were doing it. I also knew before I married you that you were meant to be a business mogul and you're supposed to stand on stages and do great, masterful things and be in that spotlight. But I also knew that the way you were going about it, being behind that chair, wasn't going to get you there no faster, and that you had to stop doing that. I also knew that you were supposed to stay home with JJ even before he was born for a season. And God told me, he said, talking about you, he said, right now she's kind of resistant to it. He said, but everything's going to change after he's born.
And they did.
I initially thought, oh, what happens when a mom sees the baby? I didn't know he actually meant everything was going to change.
Yeah.
Because he knew what was coming. And so when I told you that, hey, the Lord spoke to me, it's time to come out, I knew your response was going to be, and I knew I wasn't supposed to press him, man. I was supposed to just drop that seed and let it be. And then my brother had that dream about you and everything. And all that. I was like, hey, confirmation. I was like, yeah, I like that dream.
The whole family was ganging up on me. That's what I felt like.
But I knew, I was like, it's going to be fine. And then I remember I was at work and the TV was on and coronavirus. I like how you said that when the coronavirus got announced. I like you said that. Anyway, I was watching our governor basically state that you fell into the category of non-essential, and I called you on the phone. I was like, "Yep." And
I was pissed off.
And you had
I was mad, and I mean, I think a lot of business owners, was mad about that, and
it's incredibly wrong.
That's probably another podcast we will talk about, but it was like.
But
whoa.
I also knew that God didn't cause coronavirus, obviously, but I also knew that this was going to be the moment when you came home, you weren't going back. I knew that. I was like, okay, well, this is just how it's going to have to go down. It didn't have to go down this way, but this is the way it's going to have to go down. And you went back for a very short while when they reopened,
literally
up with your clients.
Like 2 weeks.
Yeah, you told us that this is my deadline. Get in. If you can't get in these 2 weeks, it's over. And that was it. And I knew. I was like, this is it. She's not going back. And you weren't totally sure whether or not you were going back. I knew you weren't going back. And thankfully, you're not going back to doing it that way, because since then, you've gained perspective, and we've gained new vision.
Gained new vision. But God was really, in His mercy, preserving me. Yeah. Because if you continue to, I guess what they say, hit the prick, be stubborn, and you just be resistant to change, you're going to find yourself in a position of, I guess the words coming to mind now is deterioration.
Yeah.
And a lot of times we don't know how much we are deteriorating because we're just constantly on this wheel and we're used to it. But then one day stuff just completely stopped. And go ahead.
And the other aspect of that is in Proverbs, and we're going to talk about Proverbs a lot on this podcast because we're just realizing how important Proverbs is. But the scripture talks about a dream deferred makes the heart sick.
Oh, absolutely.
And you go long enough not achieving the original goal God placed in your heart, eventually you get sick of what you're doing. And you get angry with what used to be your passion, and you begin to hate it. And, we'll talk a little bit about how that happened in the realm of ministry. We're going to transition into that next and how that can happen, because you lose sight of why you're doing what you're doing, what God called you to do, which is why it's so important when God says go, you keep checking in on, are you going in the right direction? Because you can easily get off because you're following what someone else is doing.
Yeah, and it takes just only a minor adjustment, and you can be off for years.
Yep.
And like you said, like what the Bible said, a dream deferred, makes the heart sick. And I really was sick. Because I know what God had called me to do, and I was passionate about that vision. But after a while, it's almost like losing sight. Yeah. It's like driving in a car and it's raining hard, and you ever driven when it's raining really hard, and even though the windshield wipers are moving, but you still can't see, everything is blurred, and you literally find yourself like tense like this. For me, I gotta turn the music off, baby. That's old school. But I gotta turn everything off, and I'm trying to listen. I'm trying to use all my senses to see where I'm going. And even pulling onto the side of the road is even scary because you don't know who's coming from the left or right. So that's how it felt for a good season of my life. I felt like I was in this rainstorm and I can't see nothing that I'm trying to
is working. Point about sometimes stopping is even scarier.
Yeah.
Because it's like you could be doing something that you know isn't working, but you're so used to doing it. There's a comfort in it that it's like, I'm afraid of stopping because what's going to happen if I stop? What's going to be my identity if I'm not doing this?
Self-abuse is what I call
Well,
it.
basically, yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good point. And so you experienced that with your business and things began to change. And then when we lost your dad, we experienced, I think I experienced a little heavier than you when it came to our ministry. Our church, we post about our church all the time on Instagram. We love our church, Rapture Ministries. I've been in my church since I was 2 years old when my parents came. And there's not many things that have always been constant in my life. There's always been a lot of transition, but that church, it's been a constant. I love that church with everything. And I've given my everything, will continue to give my everything to that church. It's been a hub of my life. But when her dad, who is the pastor of that church, died, I didn't expect it to affect me the way it did. At first, it didn't. But there was something that happened regarding the ministry, and everything worked out fine. But even after that thing worked out fine, I was left hurt.
Yeah.
And I had to realize, and it's like, you know, you don't always logically respond to things when something happens. It wasn't his fault that he left, and yet I was hurt by him being gone because he was such a steady force in my life personally. And I know he was for the entire church and for you as your dad, but he was my dad too. Even before we got married, you gotta understand that man had a big hand in raising me, as well as my parents. He was my pastor, but you know, I called him dad before, you know, we even got married.
We didn't bring tissues, so.
Oh yeah, we started crying, sorry. But it took me a while to realize in the beginning of 2021, because he died at the very end of 2020, how much I was hurt and kind of angry at him for being gone because he was such a steady force in my life. And I didn't really know what to do without him there when it came to the church. And so I felt myself unstuck, ungrounded. And I found myself wondering, do I belong here anymore? And that's a thought that if you asked me a couple of years ago, would you ever think about maybe you should leave your church? I was like, no, of course not. People would think that's crazy. And yet I was having that thought. And I knew well enough to know, and because I have good character, I wasn't just going to up and leave. But I also knew, okay, I got to reground myself because I realized I was grounded incorrectly. And although I was here for the vision, because God gave him the vision for Rapture Ministries, and we all attached to him and believed in it. But with him gone, that's when you find out if it's your vision too. And although I always felt like it was, and I believe it was to a large degree, there was at least part of me that was more committed to him as long as he was doing it than it was to the vision, even if he wasn't there. And so I had to reground in that and deal with that offense that I was dealing with. And there's transitions you got to work with, and we got to be very honest about these things, because then now the senior pastor of our church is his wife, my mother-in-law, your mom, Pastor Anna, who's also my pastor, also had a hand in raising me, also a mother to me, called her mom and all that beforehand, before we got married. But so she's senior pastor now, and it's okay, we shouldn't have a problem with that. She was already your pastor before. And then your brother, my brother-in-law, DJ, became associate pastor. So now he's in a new position of leadership. And I always dealt with him with a certain level of respect anyway. He was already a minister before that, but he was in a new position. But anytime something like that happens, when people change positions in your lives, if you're not cautious, you won't transition with the transition very well. And we both talked about how, even though we love him, he's your brother, you grew up with like that, it changes things. And you got to adjust your mindset and adjust to accepting it. And that sometimes takes a process.
Yeah, it is a process.
It's very much a process. And there's nothing wrong with that. But if you're not careful, you can easily become offended, because it's one thing when you have when you have a peer who is a friend or a sibling, and y'all have issues. You know, it's not like y'all are on the outs, but you have good days, you have bad days, whatever. But they're just your peer. But when they become a position of leadership, when now you have to show a certain level of submission to them, that changes things. And the things that might have just been a minor annoyance now become flaws that you have to put to the side, because someone can annoy you and still be anointed.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
You know, and it's a vastly different thing. And you know, we were talking in the car, you mentioned how you had to make the separation with your parents because they were your parents.
Oh, and that was a very difficult thing to do when I was younger, but you know, getting older and just submitting to the word. Because you get to see your parents or your leaders, especially like my brother, my parents, you know, or any leader in our church. I've had the opportunity to get to know people very personally and intimately. So you get to see all of their cracks and flaws. And when they're not operating under that grace, they're just regular people. Like they're just raggedy, and they can say stuff off the wall, and you could just be like, wait a minute. But then that grace comes on them to be what God called them to be, pastor, teacher, evangelist, whoever it is. Now you got to submit to that grace and that anointing. And we make a mistake a lot of times with the spirit of familiarity. And we have certain built-in expectations of them that if they don't live up to these expectations that I put in myself, we get offended. So now it's hard to hear the voice of God through them when they're operating in their grace. And then we try to, and then deal with them outside of that anointing. And it's like, it could be a challenge.
And one anecdote I made was that I said, the people who grew up with Jesus struggled to hear and should have rejected hearing him when he came to his hometown. And he had to leave because they would not receive him. He couldn't do any mighty works there. That's what it says. I believe it's the book of Matthew. And I said, Jesus was flawless. He literally committed no sin, and they struggled to accept him. It's got to be hard for anybody called to any fivefold ministry gift to have to step into a new position and have to deal with their family, and they are flawed. And that's the thing. People who are called a fivefold ministry gift, God chooses them as he chooses them. He doesn't choose them because they have better character or better behavior than somebody else and they earned it. He chooses them from before they're born. They have to decide to have good character, to have good behavior. And there are many people who are legitimately called to these positions who never work on their character, never work on their behavior, and it ends up destroying them, destroying their ministry, destroying their families. And those things happen. We look at them like, what happened? You were such great. No, God called them to be something great, but it's still up to them to actually work on whatever personality defects they have. And some people do and some people don't. But then you deal with people that you are close to who get called into these positions, and you already know who they are, you know their flaws, you grew up with them, you know what's right and what's wrong with them, at least in your estimation. And then there's the element of judgmentalness that comes in there too.
Yeah, but I would challenge to even rephrase, I know them. We don't know people the way we think we know people.
True.
Because unless God reveals it, you don't really know a person's heart. You don't know what people are in their quiet, private time with the Lord, what God's developing in them. We see their actions, we see things they do, and we judge them based off of that. And again, going back to sometimes we put expectations. I mean, 'cause even the disciples projected an expectation on Jesus. They thought he was coming to do something else, and he came to do something totally different. And when Jesus did not do what the disciples thought he was going to do, they got offended at him. And they literally walked away from him. So you can have an alternative motive, when you're dealing with, fivefold ministry gifts and people in leadership, and it can ruin a good relationship a lot of times.